Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, for whatever time zone you are in. I hope you are living the dream in quarantine. Thank you so much for joining our By Growers for Growers webinar today. I am Jessalyn Phillips. I am the Regional Sales Manager for the eastern half of the North American markets. I am based in, it is always sunny, Philadelphia. I'm very excited to see so many of my clients from the US and Canada join us today. For those of you that are joining our webinar series for the first time, or you've not heard of us before, Spectra is a Swedish company founded in 2006 by Swedish plant scientists and biologists with one vision: to make crop production more intelligent and more resource efficient. Today, we hold a global footprint spanning 6 continents, and we're very proud to be a global leader in innovative horticultural lighting, custom light control systems, and specialized services for greenhouses, vertical farms, and controlled plant growth environments. Through this webinar, we hope to share with you our mission, which is to redefine nature's potential and deliver operational excellence through innovation, technology, and most of all, meaningful partnerships. Thank you so much for joining us today to share best practices for greenhouse vegetables and food crops. I would like to highlight a few housekeeping items before starting today's program. First, please locate the question pane on your screen. We have allocated 20 minutes at the end of the webinar to discuss your questions. If somehow we do run out of time, one of our presenters will reach out and email you directly with the answer. We do have a lot more webinar series planned, so please register for any upcoming topics that may be of interest. A link will be provided to each of you following this webinar, as well as a copy of the recorded version. Lastly, please follow us on social media as we continue to discuss many of the topics and be able to reach you through our webinar series. And now, most of all, I'd like to introduce you to our moderator today and good friend, Christine Champagne. Christine, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jessalyn. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you and Roberto for this topic. Very exciting topic for me. As she said, my name is Christine Champagne. I'm a ornamental specialist in horticulture here in the New England area. I've been in the greenhouse industry for more than 2/3 of my career. The greenhouse lighting for transplants and finish of herbs and vegetables is right up my alley. I've watched the research over the years, and I'm very excited to hear what Roberto and his team have done. Roberto, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what we'll be talking about today?
Sure. Well, hello everyone. My name is Roberto Lopez. I'm at Michigan State University. I'm a assistant professor and controlled environment extension specialist. And today, basically, I'm going to show you some of the research that we have conducted over the years, focused on vegetables and herbs. But before we get going, I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the terminology that I'm going to use. So first off, we're going to talk about the quantity of light. And there's a term called the daily light integral, which basically describes the cumulative amount of light that a plant receives over the course of a day. As we can see in this figure, it's basically 1 square meter, and we need to think of these photons of light, especially within the photosynthetically active radiation range of 400 to 700 nanometers. So basically, this is the amount of light that a plant is going to receive over the course of the day. And the units that we use are moles per meter squared per day. So in terms of the daily light integral, those values are going to range quite a bit outdoors. On a winter day, especially in the north, so I'm located in Michigan, we can see daily light integrals as low as 5 moles. Of course, in Michigan, it can get down to around 1. On a bright sunny day in the southwestern part of the United States, we can see daily light integrals as high as 60 moles per day. However, once we move into a greenhouse, we have to deal with our glazing material as well as the superstructure and all of the other factors that are going to reduce our light levels anywhere from 40 to 70%. And really, to produce an acceptable quality vegetable or herb, we need at least a minimum daily light integral of 15 moles of light. So of course, if you're located in northern latitude, you're definitely going to need supplemental lighting just to produce an acceptable quality crop. Now here's something that I would like all of you to visit the American Floral Endowment website So you can look at these daily light integral maps that were developed by Jim Faust and his colleagues at Clemson University. So here, what I'm basically showing you is the daily light integral across the United States in January. And as you can see, for most of the country, our daily light integrals outdoors are anywhere from 5 to 15 moles of light. Now, of course, this is outdoors. When we move into the greenhouse, what did I say? We're going to reduce our light levels anywhere from 40 to 70%. So it really shows you how DLI can impact our crops. So what do we see when we increase that daily light integral? For most plants, and of course this example that I'm showing you is one of the exceptions, we see with basil, or excuse me, we see that leaves are typically smaller and thicker when you increase that daily light integral. You tend to have more branches, an increase in stem diameter, which is obviously going to produce a sturdier plant. In some instances, we'll find that plants are slightly more compact. We're going to see an increase in root growth, and most importantly, when we're talking about edible crops, we're going to see an increase in yield. So how can we increase that daily light integral in our greenhouse? So, well, this is more for floriculture producers, but by reducing hanging baskets, you're obviously going to be able to increase the daily light integral, but also by cleaning your glazing material, whether that's by removing the whitewash, any dust, or algae that has accumulated. But probably the most significant way is by utilizing supplemental light. So before we get going, I want to talk about various light qualities. So this is, again, we're going to talk briefly about UV light and then obviously focus more on that photosynthetically active radiation range of 400 to 700 nanometers, as well as far red radiation. So when we consider UV, UVA is between 315 to 400 nanometers, UVB is 280 to 315, and UVC is less than 200. So UV radiation is obviously high energy radiation that can damage cells and cause mutations not only in humans but also in plants. But in terms of the importance for plants, it can inhibit extension growth. So it can UV radiation can basically produce more compact plants and reduce intumescence in crops such as tomato. But more importantly, it tends to influence coloration or anthocyanins. So let's, for example, with lettuce, or even when we think about some of the fruits, let's say with peppers, and it's also going to influence the taste or flavonoids. Now let's move on to probably something that we are a little more familiar with, which is blue radiation. Blue radiation is known to basically inhibit extension growth. So again, you're going to have smaller leaves and shorter stems, so more compact plants. However, with certain plants, if you provide 100% blue radiation, you will actually see an increase in stem elongation. Blue radiation, of course, is known to regulate stomatal opening as water loss and photosynthesis, and it can also be used to increase anthocyanins or pigmentation, but to a lesser extent than UV light. So this is a good example of those of you that may either grow, let's say, purple fountain grass or lettuce. We see that when we grow them in a greenhouse, they don't have that nice intense color as when they are grown under full sunlight. Then there's green radiation. It has variable effects on extension growth, leaf size. It sometimes can promote elongation depending on the other radiation background. But compared to red and blue light, green light is reflected or transmitted by leaves. And the other nice thing about green radiation is that it tends to penetrate deeper into the canopy. So again, those lower leaves are going to benefit. Then red radiation, which again, with most supplemental lighting fixtures have red, it's very efficient at driving photosynthesis. And of course, it's one of the major wave bands with a lot of fixtures, anywhere from 70 to 90% of that light coming from red radiation. And lastly, far red radiation, which within the last few years has become much more important. It was considered to be minimally or not photosynthetic, but recent research has shown that it does contribute to photosynthesis. When working with crops that require long days to flower, far red radiation is obviously of importance, but it's going to contribute to larger leaves and longer stems. So when we think about supplemental lighting, here I have a figure that basically shows us how supplemental lighting can be very important when the light intensity within your greenhouse is low. For example, here, let's say that our light intensity in the greenhouse is approximately 200 micromoles, and we provide approximately 100 micromoles of light with supplemental lighting. We see that our net photosynthetic rate increases from about, let's say, 8 up to around 11. Now let's say that our light intensity in the greenhouse is approximately a little over, let's say 1,000 micromoles. We provide another 100 micromoles of supplemental light, and we see a very small increase in that photosynthesis. And why is that? It's basically because the plants are becoming light saturated. So we're providing more light, and basically the plant is not utilizing that light. And so you're wasting money by using that supplemental light during that time period. So now we're actually going to move on and start talking about some of the effects of providing supplemental lighting to vegetables, leafy greens, and herbs. So first off, we are going to talk about vegetables and the daily light integral requirements. In terms of providing supplemental light, general recommendations are to provide anywhere from 100 to 200 micromoles of photosynthetically active radiation from either HPS or LEDs. And again, this is going to be dependent on your location. Again, this is going to be our target minimum daily light integral of 15 moles of light. That's with sunlight as well as that supplemental lighting. If you can provide higher light intensities, or excuse me, higher daily light integrals, even better. So for lettuce, a minimum DLI of 12 to 13 moles is generally recommended. Optimal is between 15 to 20. So again, trying to provide a light intensity of anywhere between 90 to 150 micromoles. It's also going to improve overall lettuce quality in terms of supplemental light. But one thing that you need to remember is that it can induce tip burn when you have higher daily light integrals. In terms of photoperiod, anywhere from 10 to 16 hours works well with lettuce. So again, if you're trying to target a specific daily light integral, research at Cornell University has determined that 17 moles of light is good. That's assuming that you have good airflow in your greenhouse, because again, you don't want to have issues with tip burn, and I'm going to have a few other slides talking about that. So let's say that you have a daily light integral that's greater than 17 moles for 3 days in a row. That could contribute to tip burn. So again, we want to make sure that you have good airflow. And this basically shows us how days to harvest is influenced by the amount of light that the lettuce receives. So if you have a high daily light integral, it's only going to take 30 days. But if you have conditions that we would have in Michigan with no supplemental light, it's going to take a very long time to produce a marketable head of lettuce. So this figure basically shows you our shoot fresh weight, so the fresh weight of lettuce, as and we obviously see that our shoot fresh weight is going to increase with increasing daily light integrals. So you're going to be able to harvest that crop much faster. In terms of biomass accumulation, again, here we see that there's a linear relationship with lettuce. So in terms of our final shoot dry mass and the amount of light that the crop receives. So again, you increase that light intensity, you're going to have a larger biomass in terms of harvest. So here's an example of what I'm talking about with tip burn. So when you get into those high daily light integrals and you have very poor air movement in the greenhouse, this is what you can experience, and obviously this is going to reduce the sellability of your crop. But there is something that you can do to prevent this. So this is a commercial operation that basically has these fans over the crop. So again, they're moving the air, and that's going to prevent that tip burn. So now we are going to move on to a slightly different topic. This is some work that we conducted. It's called end of production supplemental lighting. So let's say that you just can't afford to provide supplemental light to your lettuce crop, but you can light a small area. One of the things that we notice oftentimes with red leaf lettuce is that it can be pale green to light purple, especially during the winter months when we have that low daily light integral. That in this instance, we're in a glass glazed greenhouse, and a lot of that UV light is basically not reaching the crop. And so we know that obviously the color is the key component of being able to sell lettuce, especially if it's a red leaf variety. In terms of lettuce crops, that leaf color intensity and distribution is influenced by a wide variety of factors. Basically, those red pigments are anthocyanins, and anthocyanin concentration is dependent on light quality, light intensity, as well as temperature. So basically, well, the premises of this end of production supplemental lighting is to provide supplemental light at the end of production, right before harvest, to enhance that color of the crop and the aesthetic value. So what we did is we designed an experiment, slightly complicated, where we looked at basically extending the photoperiod. So very low intensity light. We provided 4 micromoles of light. Then we used high pressure sodium lamps at 70 micromoles. And then we used LEDs, where we had LEDs that basically provided 100% red light at 100 micromoles, or a combination of 50-50 red and blue at 100 micromoles, or 100% blue light at increasing intensities, again from 25 all the way up to 100 micromoles. Remember earlier I indicated that blue light can contribute to pigmentation, or those anthocyanins. So that's why we focused on various intensities of 100% blue light. So here's our setup. We were using experimental LEDs for these studies, so we could provide the various treatments. And here's basically a close-up of those, what the plants look like under these experimental LEDs. So this is what our plants look like prior to the end of production supplemental lighting. We worked with 4 different cultivars, and you can see that because they were grown under relatively low daily light integral of 6 moles of light in the greenhouse, there was very little pigmentation. So they almost look like green leaf varieties. So this is the stage that they were placed under the lighting treatments. And here's our results. So basically what we're looking at is, this is our control. So again, basically only receiving photoperiodic lighting for 16 hours at 4 micromoles, our high pressure sodium treatment, our 100% red light treatment at 100 micromoles, our combination of red and blue at 100 micromoles, and then our 100% blue with increasing intensities from 25 to 100 micromoles. And then here we have basically after 5 days, 7, and 14 days of end of production supplemental light. So what did we find? Well, we found that basically 100 micromoles of either red, a combination of red and blue, or blue light led to increased anthocyanin production. However, the treatment that really provided the most intense coloration was a combination of red and blue at 100 micromoles. So this is with lettuce Cherokee. And then let's look at Ruby Sky, another cultivar. And again, we found very similar results. So look at after 14 days, how nice that color is. Obviously, even within 5 days, we see that the crop obviously looks much better than the control. So our conclusion is that anywhere from 5 to 7 days of end of production supplemental lighting at 100 micromoles promotes red pigmentation of lettuce. And this is becoming used throughout the world in terms of enhancing color with lettuce when you have relatively low daily light integrals. So on our MSU floriculture website, we have a series of articles if you want to read more about enhancing red leaf lettuce color, as well as ornamental crops. So now we're going to move on to talk about supplemental lighting radiation quality as it influences basically transplant growth and development. So we're looking at high wire transplants, and these are basically our lighting treatments, as you can see from the outside. So just to give you a little bit of background information, obviously both controlled environment and field production requires high quality transplants. And this is going to lead to earlier and multiple harvests per growing season, better stand development, as well as increased profitability for growers. But there's been a lack of published data in terms of spectral quality. Oftentimes when we talk to individuals that are growing vegetable transplants, they want to utilize just high pressure sodium lamps, and we ask why. And they don't necessarily know the reason why, but they want to stick to high pressure sodium lamps. And then those studies that have been published basically have only focused on red and blue radiation. So we basically wanted to look at the addition of green as well as far red radiation and how it would impact these transplants. So again, here's an example of what can occur when transplants are placed in an environment with very low light. So this is a facility located in the north, and there's no supplemental light. So it's going to take a very long time for that crop to produce fruit. So in terms of the plant material, we worked with cucumber, elise, as well as pepper cathia, and tomato climstar. So these are the three that were in the study. And basically, seeds were sown in a grow chamber. Then they were moved to a greenhouse. They were transplanted into the rockwool cubes, and then we basically let the crop grow, and data was collected. So again, germinated in a grow chamber at 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Were then allowed to grow in the greenhouse for a few days at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. They were then transplanted into rockwool cubes, so cucumber after 10 days, tomato after 14 days, as well as for pepper, and then they were grown in the greenhouse, and data was collected. Okay, so our first treatment, again, we wanted to provide the same photoperiod across treatments, so we had a low intensity photoperiodic treatment from a high pressure sodium lamp where we provided 25 micromoles of light. And here you can see the light spectrum of this HPS lamp. So again, this treatment is going to be called the HPS 25 treatment because we provided 25 micromoles of light. Our next treatment was a treatment again with high pressure sodium where we provided 120 micromoles of light. So again, this is supplemental lighting. Then we had our LED treatments. In this particular one, we had a treatment, again, a total of 120 micromoles, but 20 of those micromoles were from blue light, 10 from green light, 75 from red, and 15 from far red. Our next treatment was just the traditional red and blue, so 25 micromoles from blue and 95 from red. And our last LED treatment contained or provided 30 micromoles of blue, 30 of green, and 60 of red. So again, you can see what the light treatments look like. And again, all of the supplemental light treatments provided 125 micromoles of light. So let's look at our results. Again, just to briefly give you in terms of the daily light integral, under our Michigan conditions with the control, we were providing approximately 6 moles of light. And with our supplemental lighting treatments, we were at approximately anywhere from 11 to 12 moles of light. So here we're going to look at how our supplemental lighting treatments influenced stem diameter. So what we can see is that obviously increasing our daily light integral from 6 to approximately 12 moles of light, we saw an increase in stem diameter across our treatments compared to the unlit control. And obviously increased stem diameter is going to contribute to a sturdier young plant. So again, anywhere from a 17 to 27% increase in stem diameter. There was no significant difference between these two LED treatments. And we found that by providing blue, green, and red radiation, we saw about a 6% increase in stem diameter. So now let's look at the height. Again, this is going to be very dependent on how those young plants are going to be utilized. If they are going to be grafted, then obviously height is going to be of importance. With cucumber, we found that obviously growing them under low light conditions is going to contribute to stem elongation. And by increasing that daily light integral, we had much more compact cucumber transplants. So anywhere from a 37 to a 52% reduction in height with supplemental light. And by providing only red and blue radiation as we would expect, we saw about a 19 to 23% reduction. So here's our actual photograph of our cucumber. So this photograph was taken after 28 days. And again, here's our various treatments. You can see where the most compact transplant was the one grown under red and blue light alone. We can see that high pressure sodium and the blue, green, and red radiation were very, very similar. And again, obviously a low quality transplant grown under the control. Now let's move on to tomato. Excuse me. With tomato, we found quite the opposite results as we did with cucumber. So in terms of height, tomato transplants that were grown under the control were actually more compact compared to most of the supplemental lighting treatments. So we saw about a 23 to 29% increase in height under supplemental light. However, about a 22 to 25% decrease in tomato height when we only provided red and blue radiation compared to the other treatments. In terms of leaf area, as surprisingly, we found that we had an increase in leaf area when we used LEDs that had, again, the addition of green radiation. So again, that green radiation is increasing our leaf area. About a 9 to 51% increase compared to the other 4 treatments. In terms of fresh weight of that transplant, again, we saw that a pretty significant increase when we basically provided, again, green radiation. So anywhere from a 15 to 88% increase in fresh weight compared to the control. So here are the tomato transplants. Again, you can see that with supplemental light, the transplants were obviously much taller compared to the control. You also see, and one thing that we didn't measure was chlorophyll content, but obviously we're going to have leaves that are much darker in color compared to the control with supplemental lighting. Lastly, we're going to move on to pepper. So with pepper, we found that leaf area was slightly reduced under 2 treatments. So the treatments providing green and far red and just red and blue light alone. About a 19 to 28% reduction compared to the other treatments, and a 12 to 22% with the blue and red. In terms of fresh weight, we found that seedlings grown under high pressure sodium or supplemental lighting, again providing blue, green, and red radiation, had increased fresh weights anywhere from about 18 to 26%. So here's a side view of our pepper transplants. This was after 35 days under the supplemental lighting treatments. And again, you can see much larger leaf areas, right? When we provide blue, green, and red, as well as under the high pressure sodium lamps. So what's the take home message from these from the study? Well, we found that leaf area, as well as both fresh and dry weight, so basically biomass, which was obviously contributed to by an increase in photosynthesis, was greatest under a treatment providing blue, green, and red light, again from LEDs. We found that the stem diameter of cucumber, tomato, and pepper was generally greatest when the transplants were grown under either high pressure sodium lamps or LEDs, again providing blue, green, and red radiation. We found that when green radiation replaced either red or blue radiation in, for example, comparing these 2 treatments, we found that leaf area and fresh weight of all 3 was significantly greater. Generally, if you want to produce a transplant that's compact, basically just using red and blue radiation is going to contribute to that. Again, it's going to impact leaf area. The tallest tomato transplants were those grown under the following treatments. So again, treatments that had green radiation or green and far red, and again, the high pressure sodium. The inclusion of far red radiation also reduced the incidence of leaf necrosis in tomatoes. So we did find that under certain treatments, there was, excuse me, under the supplemental lighting treatments, there was an incidence of leaf necrosis, but when we provided far red radiation, that decreased. The lowest percentage of visible buds for all three were under the control, and when we only provided red and blue light. So again, that was also quite interesting. So lastly, we are going to talk about increasing flavor with culinary herbs. So we're going to use basil as a case study. And basically the objectives of this study were to determine how light intensity and carbon dioxide concentration influences growth and development, volatiles, but most importantly, consumer preference, because we can basically change the flavor of basil, but what do consumers prefer? So basically, we're going to start off. So the reason we started this research is that we did a national survey of growers, and we asked them how much would research on manipulating the growing environment to improve crop flavor benefit their operation. And we found that about 52% said very likely, and about 39% said moderately. Then we asked the question if their customers would be willing to pay more for herbs that had increased flavor. And overwhelmingly, we found that 84% of respondents indicated that their customers would pay more if their culinary herbs had an increase in flavor. So basically, we looked at increasing the light intensity. Now, again, this is indoors. So this is sole source lighting, where we provided basil seedlings anywhere from 100 to 600 micromoles of light. So 600 micromoles of light is a lot of light. That basically gives you a daily light integral of 35 moles. So probably it's definitely on the high end. But this is 2 weeks after sowing, and you can obviously see the difference in leaf area, in stem diameter, in rooting. So here's what the trays look like. Obviously, we have a nice canopy coverage under the 400 to 600 micromoles treatment compared to the 100 micromoles. Excuse me. So in terms of shoot fresh mass, we obviously see an increase with increasing light intensity. So anywhere from 0.13 all the way to 0.52 grams. So about a nearly 300% increase in shoot fresh mass by increasing that light intensity. In terms of leaf area, we saw basically a over 700% increase in leaf area by, again, increasing the light intensity. So what volatiles were we most interested in? Obviously, when we think of basil, there's a smell and taste that we can attribute with basil. With basil, there's several compounds. Eugenol is basically a compound within basil that gives it the aroma as well as the flavor of cloves. There's also methyl eugenol, and both of these are both phenylpropanoids. Then we have methylchemical, which gives basil the aroma and flavor of anise, and again, another phenylpropanoid. And then we have 1,8-cinnalol, which gives it, again, the aroma of eucalyptus. This is a monoterpenoid. And then we have linalool, which basically is described as having a floral with spiciness. And some folks will actually indicate that smells and tastes like Fruit Loops. So again, these were the volatiles that we were most interested in looking at. So we know that volatiles can change with environmental conditions such as temperature, light intensity, and carbon dioxide concentration. So again, we wanted to see how light and CO2 influenced these volatiles within basil. So interestingly, here's our results. So here we have our increasing light intensity. Again, remember we had treatments of 100, 200, 400, and 600 micromoles. So with linalool, which gives us that fruit with spiciness or a Fruit Loops flavor, we found a linear increase in the concentration of linalool when we increased the light intensity. at that young plant stage. We also found that cinnalol, which basically gives us that eucalyptus aroma, again, increased linearly with increasing light intensity. And then eugenol, again, the clove-like taste and smell. Again, we saw that similar concentrations at 100 to 200, and then obviously an increase at 400 to 600 micromoles of light. And looking at all three, we obviously see that as you increase the light intensity, you see an increase in these flavor compounds. So in terms of the consumer component, I didn't think I was going to have enough time to talk about it, so I'll briefly basically just tell you about it. We found that actually consumers preferred the basil that was grown at 200 micromoles, anywhere from 400 to 600 micromoles. The flavor was so intense that most consumers thought it tasted like licorice. But again, there were some consumers that preferred basil within this area, but the vast majority prefer the basil that was grown at 200 micromoles, under 200 micromoles of light. So with that, you can visit our website and you can basically Google MSU floriculture, where we have lots of articles on managing light in greenhouses as well as in indoor production facilities. I also wanted to make you aware of a book that my colleague Eric Runkle and I and several contributors published 2 years ago. Basically, it targets a wide variety of crops. It's an updated and expanded version of Lighting Up Profits, which was published in 2004, and it's available both in print and digital versions through Amazon. With that, I would like to thank my graduate students and technicians and undergrads who contributed to the research, as well as to our various funding sources. And with that, I can entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the both of you. We do have some questions that have come in. I'm going to throw these at you guys. First, based on your research results on similar effects of HPS and full spectrum LEDs on transplants grown in greenhouses, would you recommend to replace HPS with full spectrum LEDs for higher photon efficacy?
So again, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, with the results from the study that I showed, where we had red, green, and blue radiation, we had similar results to the high-pressure sodium treatment. So again, in making your decision in terms of switching from HPS to LED, it's obviously energy costs are going to be of importance. We've found that obviously under LEDs, there was no detrimental effects. Some folks will say, well, you know, you have the heat from the HPS lamps that is going to contribute to increasing the temperature within your greenhouse. But when you think about it, an HPS lamp is not providing that much heat, and it's an inefficient way of heating. So yes, you're heating the greenhouse with an HPS, but you're using a lot of energy that way. So again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis in determining those factors. The cost of your electricity is another important factor, the longevity of the fixtures, etc.
Thank you so much. I'm just scanning here for additional questions. Why did you select a basil variety that was not resistant to downy mildew?
So the main reason we chose Nufar is that my graduate student had done a screen of a wide variety of basil cultivars, and in terms of yield, it's one of the cultivars that has the largest yield. So we were obviously not looking at downy mildew resistance, but more so at yield.
Okay, and following up with that, what about rooting in the transplants?
What's the question there?
Yeah, the question came through, what about the rooting in the transplants?
Is that with the basil or with the
Not
vegetables.
specified. So if this listener wants to follow up on the chat, I'll circle back to that.
Okay.
I do have another question. How does the length or timing of exposure impact growth versus just DLI?
So the question is how does the length of an exposure of the light intensity impact growth? Is that what I'm understanding?
How does the length or timing of exposure impact growth versus just DLI?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, so let's say that you provide, actually, why don't I have some extra slides here, and this will help us in terms of, so for example, here, basically, I have a table that shows how many hours of light, you know, in this example, you can run them from 8 to 20 hours, right? And here we have various light intensities. So you can see that if you have, if your supplemental lights are only providing 50 micromoles of light and you run them for 20 hours, you're only going to increase your daily light integral by about 4 moles of light. If your supplemental light fixtures provide 150 micromoles of light, you only have to run them for 8 hours, right, in order to get the same daily light integral. So with vegetables, I'll use tomato for example, you don't want to light for 24 hours of a day because there are some physiological disorders that can occur. And so in terms of providing that light intensity, remember the figure that I showed earlier. If you provide, let's say, 200 micromoles of light and you already have, let's say, 1,000 micromoles from sunlight, you're really not contributing much more to the photosynthetic output. So with supplemental lighting, you're going to want to use those fixtures when it's dark or during the night. That's really when you're going to see the greatest benefit. Yes, you can light for longer periods of time, which again, as long as probably one of the most important things is increasing that daily light integral. And again, in most instances, not lighting for 24 hours, but giving the plants that dark period so that you don't run into physiological disorders. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you. Next coming in, how do you compensate for the loss of infrared light when switching from HPS to LED lighting to manage plant temperature versus air temperature, especially in tomato, cucumber, and peppers?
Okay, so we briefly talked about that earlier. Again, yes, there's obviously going to be a difference in plant temperature under a high pressure sodium lamp. We've measured about a 1 to 2 degrees Celsius reduction in those that are grown under LEDs. So one thing that growers can do is basically provide bottom heat if you have heated floors or heated benches, and that's actually a much more efficient way of heating where you're going to basically increase the plant temperature versus utilizing a high pressure sodium lamp to do that. Or you can slightly increase the air temperature within your greenhouse to compensate for that loss.
Did you look into the effect of different light combinations on the root mass in basil or in tomato transplants?
So it's a great question. Unfortunately, with both the basil and the transplants, they were grown in rock wool, which made it very difficult to quantify root growth because obviously it's not like a peat-based substrate where you can wash off the peat and perlite. However, we've done a lot of work with ornamentals, and we basically see that as you increase that daily light integral, you have a very large increase in root dry mass or root biomass. And it's very genus specific, but across the board, we see a very large increase, which obviously then is going to reduce the young plant stage.
Can you go more into how light might damage plants, such as intensity and frequency?
Okay. So that's another nice thing when you compare LEDs to high pressure sodium lamps. So with HPS lamps, you need to be concerned with plants being too close. Not only because of the heat, which is one of the primary reasons. But with LEDs, you can grow plants much closer to them. So when we think about sole source lighting conditions, we can have the fixtures relatively close to the plant material. In terms of light stress, so the question was on light stress, right?
Can go into more how light might damage plants based on intensity and frequency.
Okay, so with intensity, there's obviously in certain situations with certain crops where folks will really go to the extremes. As I said, with vegetables, typically the highest that we see is 200 micromoles. Again, that's on average. Other crops we see folks going much higher. In terms of damage or stress with the basil, I'll give you an example with the basil. So when we were providing 600 micromoles of light to basil young plants, we did see a purple coloration in the leaves. And again, that was basically a photo stress. When you think of it as a young plant, just germinating in 600 micromoles is quite high. But once we've transplanted those seedlings into the greenhouse, they turn green within a few days. So more importantly is the duration, right? So again, as I've indicated before, 24 hours is not recommended for most crops. 20 is probably the highest you want to go in terms of the hours per day of providing either supplemental or sole source light.
Okay. And do you have experience with light intervals, short or long, over the day rather than one continuous period?
We have not done any studies with that. So we basically have focused on one light intensity throughout the day. With most of our studies, one thing I didn't mention is that we work on, so let's say if we have a 16-hour photo period, what we'll do is the lights will come on, for example, at 6 a.m. and then they'll turn off, let's say at 8 a.m. when the sunlight sun has come out. And then during that time period when the sun is out, there's a threshold. So if the light intensity is above 400 micromoles, then the lamps shut off. If it's below that, then they turn on. And then again, the lights will turn on, let's say between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. so that we again are providing that 16-hour photo period. So again, the reason that we're turning off the lights during the day is again because of that light saturation. We don't want to waste energy and obviously money by lighting when the plants are not going to be able to utilize that extra light. But again, during the morning hours when we don't have a whole lot of light intensity from the sun, and as well as obviously during the evening, that's when we want to provide that supplemental light, or when it's cloudy outdoors.
Are you able to recap the relationship between watering needs as DLI increases and all other factors being equal?
So yes, this is one thing that we have found. We haven't quantified this, but we have definitely seen it that when you provide supplemental light, especially with high pressure sodium, you are going to have to irrigate slightly more. Again, it's mainly because of that radiation. Under LEDs, we haven't noticed much of a difference in terms of irrigation frequency. In terms of whether you have more blue light, obviously, as we indicated earlier, blue light is going to affect stomatal opening, but we have not quantified how much of an effect it has on water uptake. We have conducted studies where we have found that basically the nutrients within a plant, so when we do tissue analysis, there is quite a bit of a difference in tissue analysis or various nutrients when seedlings are grown under supplemental or sole source lighting compared to when they're not. So that's also quite interesting. And there's papers on our website that go into those details, which I won't have time to talk about today.
Based on that, are you able to repeat the Michigan State URL that you mentioned?
Sure. So best way, it's kind of long. The best way to find it is basically if you go on your search engine and basically just write in MSU floriculture, and that will take you to our website. And then there's various categories, so then you can go to light management, and you'll find various articles within those tabs.
We'll also include that in our follow-up email.
Okay.
Another question coming in, how might outdoor growers be able to manipulate DLI levels?
So that's going to be slightly more challenging in terms of in terms of photoperiod. It's you can definitely do that. What folks have done in the past, especially with ornamentals that are grown outdoors, is what they would use high pressure sodium. Obviously now you can use LEDs where you can manipulate the day length, obviously increasing the day length. With DLI, it's going to be quite challenging, and really in outdoors, you're going to have quite a bit of high enough DLI from the sun that supplemental lighting would not be economically feasible. Obviously, you could reduce your daily light integral with shade cloth.
What is the effect of nutritional quality for supplemental light? High biomass implies more nutrition?
So I believe what you're asking is, if you're providing supplemental light, are you going to have to increase your basically the nutrition for the crops? And again, we have really not looked at that. We don't want to confound any treatments by obviously increasing nutrition with a treatment that's providing a higher light intensity. So you might have to. That's true. Plants are going to be growing faster, so they may be uptaking more nutrients. When you think about supplemental lighting and even sole source lighting, you can provide plants with additional light, but there's other factors, right, that contribute to photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide is something that's also very important. And we find that typically folks that are growing vegetables and herbs are supplementing CO2. But again, yes, you don't want to be CO2 limited, as well as nutrition can also play a role, and even temperature. So making sure that all of those factors are optimal will obviously provide the greatest benefit.
Do you correlate your nutrient composition to your light intensity, or always use the same solution?
We always use the same solution so that nutrition is not a confounding factor. So I'll give you an example of a study that we recently conducted, where we grew various herbs in greenhouse compartments with increasing temperature and various light intensity. So obviously the plants that were grown in the treatments that had high temperatures were going to require more frequent irrigation. So what we do in those situations is we will provide the same fertility, so all the plants will get the same amount of water soluble fertilizer, but in between they will just get clear water, so that all the plants again are receiving the same nutrition, but obviously those that are grown under higher light and higher temperatures are going to get irrigated more, but that's not going to impact the nutrition, because again, we're not going to leaching, we're basically just irrigating the crop, if that makes sense.
Okay, and we're going to start taking our final questions here. Everyone else that does not get answered, we will have a direct reply to you from our presenters today. But do you look at yield optimization versus light energy cost rather than light intensity? What's the optimum?
Okay, so yes, with other studies, I'll give an example. With microgreens, we have found that you can increase the light intensity, and really it doesn't make sense with a crop like microgreens to really provide a high daily light integral, because in terms of the yield, you're spending more on fixtures as well as on electricity, and it's not economical. But with other crops, yes, definitely increasing light intensity and that daily light integral is going to pay off in terms of yield.
Okay, so I think everyone, we're going to start to wrap the session here today. For those of you who joined late, my name is Jessalyn Phillips. I am the Regional Sales Manager for the Eastern half of the North American markets for Heliospectra. I am based in sunny Philadelphia. I want to thank both Christine Champagne and Dr. Roberto Lopez so much for presenting today with us. We do have a whole series of by growers for growers discussions going on this month. So be sure to register for some of our on-demand recordings, as well as join in on the fun. You will receive a follow-up email from the sales support of Heliospectra. If you are interested in a smart way to control your DLI, we do have HelioCore offered by Heliospectra. You will get a follow-up email to connect with our sales team. We love to discuss HelioCore, as well as Elixia, our flexible dynamic spectrum unit, and Mitra, our fixed spectrum unit. So thank you so much for your time today, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session. Stay home, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.